Okay, welcome to this video tutorial. What we're looking at today, how to analyse persuasive writing. Okay, so we'll go through it in a step-by-step way. First of all, some of the basic questions that you'll have to address in the introduction to your analysis. What types of persuasive text are there in the different publications that you may be asked to look at? What is a contention, and what is tone and style? So we're going to look at a few example texts here. First one, feature article. Remember, you can pause the video at any point if you want to read in a bit more detail. So the feature article gives a lot more background information on a particular issue. It tends to be quite an extended text. Of course, it's very opinionated. It gives a particular stance, a particular viewpoint on an issue, and it often quotes from interviews. Now, this example, soft love is breeding a generation of bullies. It focuses on parenting. Okay. And the contention here, that means the viewpoint, essentially the point of view or the argument primarily that the author is trying to make. Here, in this case, is that parents who lavish their children with praise undeservedly, rather than using their judgment and only praising when they're necessary, often turn their children into bullies. So you might not know right from wrong if you are flattered constantly. Okay? So that's the contention in that case. The actual tone, that means if you imagine reading it aloud, the kind of voice that you would use is quite concerned at this parenting, and a lot of statistics and things are used to back up the viewpoint. The style is quite informal. Some of the language is very emotive and quite conversational. Okay, it's certainly not the most conservative style you'll see. Style, remember, of course, is about formality. It's about the language chosen. Okay, not about the emotion behind it. That's tone. Next type of text you might be asked to look at is an editorial. So this is perhaps the most authoritative type of newspaper publication you'll be asked to look at. Again, comes at the start of the newspaper usually, quite regularly. It's the views of the editor or a group of senior journalists who represent the voice of the newspaper. So their official endorsed viewpoint on the particular issue that's been in the media recently. And it tends to argue in a very knowledgeable and reasonable tone. If it's a broadsheet newspaper, that tone will also be quite conservative and the language very formal. Some of the tabloid newspapers, like the Herald Sun, will still use very sensational language, even though the editorial is meant to be very official. This example is about road safety. Eye in the sky may be the answer. What it argues, using a particular incident where police actually put road users in danger, trying to pursue a criminal, the contention is that that was a risk that was unnecessary, and that cameras can be used in order to avoid extended police chases, which will put people in danger. Okay, so the tone is very concerned, even outraged. The style is more informal, okay, more personal. The next example, the opinion piece. Okay, so a particular journalist, often with a regular column, like a weekly slot in the newspaper, will write their own personal views on a particular issue, something topical, something current. This example by Andrew Bolt, this is from the Herald Sun, and it's about the government stance on protecting possums. Now, his tone is outraged. He's shocked at the government's position protecting what he calls giant rats. He's very much about giving people the right to protect their own property and their own gardens against these creatures which he sees as vermin. Okay, his style is very personal, very informal, conversational, and there's some kind of colloquial language there as well. That kind of chatty, more engaging style. This one focuses in particular on Kylie Minogue, popular singer, in particular on a dress that she wore, which the writer sees as not really befitting her age and also her status as kind of a pop queen. Okay, so it focuses, in terms of her contention, really on not necessarily her having to dress conservatively, but her dressing more appropriately. It acknowledges in quite a reasonable way that she is a very successful woman. Okay, so it's not overly critical of her as a performer, In fact, it actually celebrates her and various other performers. But the contention is that she does need to choose more wisely. So a very kind of personal, involved, interactive style, and the tone is quite humorous at times. Now, the letter to the editor. This is not written by a journalist. This is written by a reader. Okay, so someone often addressing a particular article that they've read in the newspaper will write a letter into the newspaper, and the editor may choose to publish it. Okay, so it often responds to a particular point that a writer has made, which sometimes is referenced in the letter, and it's often very brief, but it uses far more colourful and emotional language. So these examples are about the suggestions about how you reclassify mental illness and also the treatment of mental illness like depression. Okay, so if you have a look at the first one, working together, very personal. It gives personal anecdotes, experiences of the actual reader. Yet the tone is, the style, sorry, is quite formal. Her contention is that drug therapy needs to go hand in hand with counselling, and that it should be a collaborative effort of the healthcare team, as she says. Try when you're defining contention to use your own language rather than just picking out words from the text. Okay, so try and paraphrase what you think the writer's main argument is. The one beneath, it's in the wording, is about the reclassification of certain mental illness or disorders. And again, the person has a personal experience. They suffer from schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety, and they don't like the fact that the two conditions are being separated. Okay, because she gives this example of if she were applying for a job, she would have to declare two separate conditions, okay, which might impede her chances. You see there it gives their name and what suburb they're from as well. So a very personal account, often very colourful, as I said, in its language, often quite over the top, exaggerated, because it's about personal experience. Obviously the reader may put more stock, more value in that, because it shows that the writer has been involved with the issue. They're not just dealing with it in the abstract. Now, the types of appeal. These are general strategies that a writer might use to work on readers' emotions and make them responsive to the arguments they're making, make them engage. Some of them are more coaxing and cajoling, some of them are more forceful. This one, perhaps the most cynical. Think about advertising that you've seen, particularly for hygiene products and such, often using fear to make you feel like you should get on board and support the writer's point of view, so really forcing you to confront an issue. Patriotism, your sense of pride and honour in your national identity, sometimes manipulated to get you on side. The hip pocket, this is your need to be economical and frugal, so keep track of your money. And often, obviously, that would be a concern if you are selling products. You want people to make them feel that they're making a saving by purchasing your product. Justice and fairness. People naturally have a sense of what's right and what's wrong. So if you're able to shock them with something that obviously seems unfair, then you're likely to get them on your side. So writers often will do that. And this one depends really just on the use of evidence, solid reasons and evidence. This is appeal to logic. If something seems irrational or illogical, you can get your reader on side, so writers will use that. Now, types of evidence that might be used to support a particular argument. Okay, so these will be attached to particular reasons, just to give them more depth and more weight. First of all, anecdote. So a short personal account, often you see them in those letters to the editor. And as I said before, it suggests that the writer has some special insight, that they have an actual experience which makes their opinion more valid. This one is from the example on mental illness. Talks about an actual patient who has suffered, so the writer themselves has suffered with clinical depression. Okay, so we put more value in that. Case studies quite similar to anecdote, but often about another person, so not necessarily the writer themselves directly. Obviously it personalises an issue again, it makes it seem more involved. This is the one about the police cameras and the dangerous police pursuits and the cameras that can be used to avoid them. So the example here is a father that was killed when a car was travelling the wrong way and it was involved with a police pursuit. So the case study of something that happened to this person, okay, David Rendina, and that's used as evidence to back up the writer's opinion that the police behaviour was poor. Now, statistics and facts often the easiest to spot, particularly statistics. So facts and figures, they make a point of view seem more scientifically based or more widely held. And the more kind of authority you have, obviously you strengthen your opinion. So if a writer has statistics from a recognized body or a large survey of people, an organisation that has respect and a good reputation, like a university study or something like that, then it will add weight to their argument. Okay. Also, when it comes to surveys, if it seems like most people share their view, the reader will feel in the minority if they disagree, and it will force them to reconsider their position and possibly move to the right side. This is the one about possums, Andrew Bolt. Use of facts and figures here, just to show the extent to which possums are kind of present. One possum every 12 hectares in the wild, 12 every hectare in the city, and yet you get fined $300. So it seems a little bit disproportionate given how common they are. Experts' opinions. Now, if you can have a professional like a doctor or a lawyer, the writer will often use them again to add weight and authority to an argument. This is the piece about parenting. So we have Professor Helen McGrath from RMIT. Obviously, a quotation from them adds weight. It's another voice to the writer's argument. Okay, so it's far more persuasive in that respect. Now, these are just some of the most common persuasive language techniques. Obviously, there are lots more. You really just need to pick on any quotations and try and explain in your own words how they persuade the reader or position the reader to agree. But we'll just go through some of these common examples. So, rhetorical question hyperphora. Rhetorical question invites the reader to agree or provokes them to take a position and think about the issue. So often used at the beginning and the end of pieces. If you look at the example from Hello and Goodbye Possums, got a couple of rhetorical questions there. Hyperphora is very similar, but if you look at the second example, again from the Possums article, it actually answers the question, so it seems more conclusive, like there's no way out of the writer's argument. They ask a question, then they give a very solid, convincing answer. Okay. Emotive language. This is really a very common one. You have to be careful to choose the key, most pertinent, most obvious examples of language that has a particularly powerful effect on the reader. Because often language seems in some way emotive, but you have to be more selective. Just choose a few examples from the text you're given that are particularly strong in their effect. So they either put subject in a very positive or very negative light. Look at the description of the possums here, and the destruction that they cause to the garden, eaten alive by an army of these giant rats. Okay, so often some exaggeration here as well, describing them as giant rats. Eaten alive is also very emotive. It seems unfair, and it seems really very destructive, their behaviour. And an army, obviously, to stress their numbers and the volume of possums that are on the loose, in the writer's opinion. Inclusive language, another very common one. Very simple use of inclusive pronouns like we, us, and our to include the reader and engage them, encourage them to feel that they're on the same side as the writer and the majority of public opinion. Okay, so by including them, it turns them around if they're disagreeing and tries to move forward with them. Okay, so a couple of examples there from the Possums article. Repetition and listing. Very straightforward one, reinforcing the writer's message. If it's a list of 3, we call that triptych. Polis and deton is when you repeatedly add and, okay, when you're listing particular items. If you look at the first example, that phrase is repeated, can't be, because. Okay, so the triptych, that rhetorical kind of effect of a list of 3 there. The second example on Kylie's dress sense, you've got ace and deton when you're listing items with just commas between them. Think her Bardot phase, her goddess period, showgirl Kylie, indie Kylie, and hot pants hero disco babe Kylie. And then the next one, ace, polysyndeton, where it repeats and the new and the novel, and you need a deep well of tricks. Ace and deton with the commas and polysyndeton with and, they both produce this cumulative effect, so the reasons seem to build up. Comparisons or analogies, sometimes these are quite humorous, sometimes quite literary, so they might make the writer's point of view more accessible, drawing on similarities or highlighting differences with other situations or objects, items, often very visual or hyperbolic, hyperbole being exaggeration. So this description really typifies it. This is Kylie's dress. The writer is quite outraged by. It's compared to a cross between an old string shopping bag and a tangle of black dental floss. Okay, so not a particularly appealing or attractive image. Slightly humorous, very hyperbolic, exaggerated. Phonological devices. Now these are just worth a mention. Sometimes it's quite hard to get a lot of mileage out of describing these. They simply make the statement more memorable, and they're sound devices. That's what phonological means. So alliteration, the repetition of the same sound in several words close to each other, or rhyme. Okay, so we have alliteration here, flash the flesh, and pout and pose. Counter-argument. You may know this as a rebuttal in terms of debating. So you anticipate an opponent's objections and you respond to them forcefully, so that the reader feels the argument is comprehensive, so that you're not so one-sided and biased, you're not reasonable enough to consider the other point of view. Sometimes just a more sophisticated term for counter-argument there, prolepsis. The example here on Kylie's dress sense, many will argue that she's ageless, but music is a fickle game which thirsts for youth and the new and then it goes on. Okay, so often the counter-argument seeks to appear reasonable and rational, but ultimately, whilst you acknowledge the other side of the argument, yours, or the writer, gives theirs as the most appealing, with a whole list of reasons to follow. Now let's have a look at actually how you construct an essay. So I've got a few examples here, just in terms of your approach in the exam, step by step, simple stuff here. So read the text, identify first of all the topic or the issue, the subject of the article, and then the contention. What is their point of view? What is their stance on that subject or topic? Okay, you should be able to sum it up in just a sentence, really. That needs to be very clear from the outset of your analysis. Then you read the text again and you look very, very carefully at a lot more detail, annotating particular types of evidence that we've talked about and particular types of persuasive language. Then in terms of structuring your response, you can number through your quotes, just take it in a linear logical way, start at the beginning of the text and work through. Try and cover as many different techniques or types of evidence as you can, and then you start to write once you've decided the structure of your answer. So this is the one that I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail, so you need to read this one. Should we ditch the monarchy? Yes. Zoom in a little bit on this one. Okay, so it's a piece from the Herald Sun. The contention is very clear. It's about turning Australia into a republic and abandoning the Queen as Australia's head of state. So just give you some time to read that. You can pause the video. Okay. A model introduction then. So first of all, what your introduction needs to do is make very clear where the article's from, who the writer is, what the issue is, and what their contention is. As you see, this introduction also, as well as mentioning the contention, talks about tone, and some of the more common overall techniques, the appeal to patriotism and common sense. Okay, so tone and style, no quotations, but just overall an overview of tone, style, and perhaps some of the key appeals might be worth putting into the end of your introduction. Okay, but really the main focus is just articulating very clearly what the issue is and what the contention is. If you want to give some background on the type of newspaper, this kind of sensational tabloid like the Herald Sun, or the type of opinion piece that it is, and the typical things that we talk about, the style and tone that you'd find in those pieces, that's useful background, but the main thing is to focus on the article itself. Some model body paragraphs here then. So you use the teal structure, topic sentence, giving a technique first of all, then your example, your quotation, then your explanation, and then if you can, a link back to your topic sentence, just to make sure your paragraph is kind of organic and goes full circle, just to consolidate what you said. Okay, so have a read through these model body paragraphs. As you'll see, they start with the headline, and then just work through picking out quotations where you can talk about multiple techniques, multiple types of evidence, and explaining them in as much depth as possible. Remember, your focus really in your explanation is the effect on the reader. Okay, so this positions the reader to agree, or this has the effect of, this makes the reader feel, this suggests, this emphasizes, this highlights, those type of sentence starters, just to prompt you. Model conclusion here, just a few sentences to sum up the main points that you've said. Don't be tempted to list the techniques. Okay, that's not what the model conclusion shows, that's not what it's for. You just need to go back, give a general summary of what you found, reiterate the contention and some of the key techniques that the writer uses, and how the reader is left feeling at the end. Okay, you don't have to judge whether you think the article is successful or not. Certainly whether you agree or disagree with the issue is irrelevant. Okay, you're just focusing on the effect on the reader. Okay, what effect is intended, what effect does it have in theory. Now some articles for you to practice on. This one about the Queen. This is the other side of the coin here. So should we ditch the monarchy? No. Okay, so I'll just scroll through this and you can pause it as you see fit. So again, you're looking for the issue, the contention, tone and style to begin with, and then picking out quotes with particular techniques and evidence. Okay, another example. This is one about breastfeeding, controversial topic. Breastfeeding when it's time to let go. Another example here about politicians' private lives. Politicians must accept scrutiny of private life, so the intrusion of the media into politicians' lives. Okay, and one last example that you can have a look at. This is about sexism in Australia. Are Aussie sexist? She says yes. Author is female. Okay, So you can use those examples, go through the step-by-step approach that we talked about, and hopefully that's helped you with analysing persuasive language.